All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Snowflake Summit. Before we start, with a show of hands, how many of you guys knew that we're going to start blocking password-only sign-ins? For those of you guys who haven't raised your hand, yes, you're in for a surprise, but don't worry. We're here to tell you why we're doing this, how we're going to do it, and you can hear from one of our marquee customers on how they did it. And I gave up the name already, Greg. My name is Anush. I am a principal product manager at Snowflake. Next to me is Eric, who is one of the Uber TLs for IAM space. I'm very lucky to have him on the stage with me. And Eric is also sitting there, and he's going to talk to us about Roche's journey to kill password sign-ins. Perhaps before we can start, Eric, why don't you tell us what you've seen in the past year as the industry trends and when it comes to authentication space?
Thanks, Nish. So from my perspective, I think we're seeing this shift to better, stronger security. We're collectively realizing the limits of not just making the tools available. That's not enough. The tools have to be on by default, hard or impossible to misuse. And I think we're seeing this concretely, for example, in GCP and AWS and Azure now saying you have to sign in with multi-factor authentication. And then you're seeing this more broadly with the number of companies that are signing up to the CISA Secure by Design pledge. And so, Anush, I'm curious what we're hearing from our customers.
Absolutely. In the past year, we have heard a lot of these questions from customers where they come to us and saying, what does good look like? Where should we go as a North Star? And so it seems that it's a top of mind for our customers. And perhaps, Eric, you can tell us, what does Snowflake think about the good state in this case, and what is our vision for authentication space?
Yeah, so I like to think of the Snowflake security story as three key pillars: secure by design, easy to use, and AI-led monitoring. When I say secure by design, I really mean that the tools that we offer are secure out of the box, that they offer a high security bar. And not only that, they're easy to use. They're easy to adopt. They're easy to maintain and adapt to capture new use cases. And then they're easy to audit and understand what's happening. We spend a lot of time focusing on sort of tools in this mechanical sense of policies and rules, and that's a critical part of our security story. But with the rise of AI, we're now looking at infusing that across our systems so that we can really add capabilities that look at emergent threats in near real time to detect and respond to them as well. But of course, this is a passwordless talk, so let's talk a little more about secure by design. In this context, I think of it, again, broken down in three pieces. It's secure authentication, secure networking, and strong authorization. So for authentication, are the credentials that users are providing to Snowflake secure? Can we correctly and conclusively establish the user's identity? And then on the networking side, are the access paths that users are taking to get into Snowflake known and trusted? And then from Snowflake out to other systems, are those access paths also known and trusted? And once a user's inside that front door, inside of that secure perimeter, do they have access to the data they need when they need it, but no more? And can we make it easy to enforce the principle of least privilege? So thinking a bit more, again, about this idea of secure by design, some examples to make this concrete. Said it before, we'll keep saying it again until you're very sick of us saying it. Passwords are going away. Password-only sign-ins are going away. But of course, passwords are still very much a thing. And so we've invested in making the default password policy stronger, while passwords are still very much a thing. So now we're asking to have more complex passwords, and we're asking to have those passwords not be reused. And where we're introducing new security primitives like programmatic access tokens, we're raising the security bar as a part of that work. So out of the box, using a PAT requires you to have a network policy attached to your user or your account. And using a pat requires you to rotate it on some cadence. And we see this secure by design philosophy also with strong account defaults. So all new accounts created after October, human users need to sign in with multi-factor authentication. And so to finally get back to your original question of what does secure look like, what does good look like for our users and our vision in this space, I like to break it down in two ways. We have human users and we have service users. And we make this distinction because the use cases are very different, and correspondingly what good looks like is different. So for human users, the gold standard is single sign-on via SAML or OAuth. With single sign-on, we're establishing a trust relationship with an identity provider like Entra ID or Okta. And in that sense, we're federating out the responsibility of authenticating users to that IDP. But this is actually a really key capability because those are systems with a long track record of keeping users safe, have a really sophisticated set of features for doing so, and companies by and large already have these systems, have already invested significantly in building and maintaining them, and so Snowflake can take advantage of that existing trust. Of course, there are lots of cases where it makes sense to have user credentials, human user credentials inside of Snowflake, and there we have OAuth as our best practice. And so with OAuth, system, desktop application, local application, third-party SaaS provider can direct a user into the Snowflake login process, where Snowflake takes care of authenticating the user and can layer on all the new security protections that we're adding over time, like multi-factor authentication requirements, without the client needing to know anything about it. And on the service user side, the gold standard there is workload identity federation. So across all of the different workloads, services that are connecting into Snowflake, they're running on GCP and AWS and Azure and Kubernetes. And these workloads have credentials already available to them. Maybe it's your AWS IAM role or your GCP service account. Snowflake is learning to trust those credentials. So all you need to tell Snowflake is, hey, this is my workload running in this place with this identity. I want to trust that. And now all of a sudden, you don't need to maintain credentials. You don't have to rotate a pat or keep your password secure. You can take advantage of the credentials that are already available to you. And of course, we talk about the gold standard. Nevertheless, Snowflake supports a broad range of other authenticators because it's not always easy or possible to take advantage of the things that we think are the best. And on that note, maybe, Anush, you can start to talk to our audience a bit about how we're thinking about making the transition away from passwords.
Absolutely. And thank you for that. This makes a lot of sense in terms of the North Star, but you're 100% right. We fully appreciate that migrating to this North Star is not an easy task. In fact, in the past year, I had the pleasure of talking to more than 200 customers, trying to understand how they're thinking about this migration. And it's a very complex problem. We appreciate that. In fact, we at Snowflake have been trying to do the same thing, right? And the reason that these things get so complicated is because it requires a re-platforming of the existing platform. And there's no customer out there that has a platform team that is just sitting there to start doing these things. They have to prioritize this. They have to get it's work. They have to fund this. They have to think about a migration plan. And what it means is that they have to think about all these applications, these BI tools, these ETLs, all of that have to be migrated, the CI/CD tooling. And it's not just the application, the driver upgrades, the even user education, because now the basic things are now different, right? So they have to also think about playbooks, upgrade their support calls, talk to their ITs. So these things take time, and we appreciate that. And so knowing this complexity, one of the things to your point about how we think about operationalizing, getting to this North Star, was to kind of make this as part of the platform. So we had no objection of enforcing this in the platform to get to the good state. But the question is, how do we get there in a way that resonates with the complexity of the space? So we laid down three principles in how we came up with this timeline for enforcement. Number one, it should match with the complexity of the space. So it takes time. We need to be cognizant of that. Number two, to your point, the human and service users have different migration paths. It might be much easier to migrate the human user that is using things like Power BI or our UI versus a production service that has critical workload on it, and touching it is very sensitive, right? So the timeline should be staggered. And then the third one is making sure that we minimize chances of outages. If you start pushing these out, there may be many of our customers that be broken, and it's not a thing you want to see, right? And so to address the outage problem, one of the things that we did was to think about separating the enforcement between the new users versus existing users. The reason for that is there is no customer that puts a service user in production without testing. But having these things enforced for the new users forces them to start thinking about retooling and making sure that they're ready for this new passwordless world, right? So, and there's always a new employee joining a company, there's always a new service that goes to production. So there's always an opportunity to kind of remind the customer that this is coming. And so that's where if you look at the timeline, that's where we're starting with the new users. And then with some 6 to 9 months later, we bring it to existing users. And that kind of staggering is our way of minimizing the outages chances. So coming back to the question you asked, Eric, this is basically the way we are going to roll out passwords deprecation or password-only deprecation from our platform. The top table refers to the human users, and the dates that you see there refers to the start of the rollout. So what we plan to do is to use Snowflake BCR process. If you're not familiar with it, it is a process where we communicate changes into our behavior, and the first month is an opt-in period where for you to see the behavior, you need to change certain parameters to see. The second month is an opt-out, and after that becomes the default. So all the dates that you see there are approximation, and I repeat, approximation of the beginning of the such BCR process. And our first BCR that is going out is in June. This is where we are going to focus on human users that log into our UI with a password. Such users will be subject to multi-factor authentication. Now, we're making an exception, a temporary exception for such users when they go to BI tools. For example, Power BI, they can continue using password for a temporary amount of time, and so this enforcement is only for Snowsight. If you fast forward to August, then we're going to make this behavior across all client types only for new user created post that date. So if you have a user that created post-August, if they go to our UI, they will be subject to multi-factor authentication. And if they go to things like Power BI or Tableau, the same would apply. But the existing user that were created before that date continue to work. And then March next year, roughly speaking, is when we're going to bring this across all human users with no changes, right? So that's the plan for human users. For the service user, our starting point is in November. As you know, we have the legacy service user type, which is a kind of a exception way for applications that are old and only support password to continue to work. So such users will not be able to be created post-November date, but the existing one that you have in place will continue to work with no problem using password until June next year. So pretty much our ultimate goal is that by next summit, we can all open the champagne that there is no more passwords left, right? So that's the kind of the long answer to your question of how we want to do this. It's easy to put tables and say this is what we're going to do, but it's much harder to actually try to do this. And as I mentioned, like we have a lot of accounts within Snowflake, and we put ourselves into that shoes of like, what if we did this ahead of our customer? We actually held ourselves 6 months ahead of any other customer to get there. And it was a great learning experience, right? We noticed that there are certain things that we're missing in the product and the rough edges, quite honestly. And so we have a fleet of announcements that we're going to make through this talk that hopefully helps with that migration and makes it easier for you guys to migrate. The first announcement is around support for passkey. As you know, this is the standard way of doing multi-factor authentication. So as of pretty much last week, this product is in GA, so you can use things like Touch ID, Face ID, Windows Hello, security key as a second factor for logging into Snowflake. And of course, it's much easier to use than taking a phone out of your pocket every time. The second announcement for us is support for authenticator apps. We heard from many of our customers that they're using these apps from Google, from Microsoft, and 100 plus more that you can go get from App Store for their consumer web, banking apps, and also at work, those are the ones that are authorized, right? And so they were telling us, Duo is good, but it's not approved in our environment. We need something that works, and this is the answer. And now we support authenticator apps out of the box. If you're not familiar with it, it basically generates a 6-digit code that gets rotated every 30 seconds without having to have internet connectivity, and now we can use it with Snowflake. The other announcement that we have coming very soon is support for OTP. This is our answer for break glass. So what you could do as an admin, you can set up these OTPs for the break glass users, store them in a vault, and you can create them, many of them at the same time. And so when there is an actual break glass, you reach out to your vault, take it out, break the glass, and give it to the on-call engineers, and just like that, they could, become productive again. So that's also coming very soon. And this is basically, to Eric's point, this should really complement our story for human user migration. I think this is pretty much what we've heard so far about what was missing in that stack. When it comes to service user, as Eric mentioned, it is very important for us to move to federation as much as possible. You hear Eric saying that, this is where we want to be as a starting point. And despite we supporting external auth, we went back to the whiteboard and asked the question, can we make it easier to set up? Can we make it such that you don't have to go through many, many, many steps to do so? And this was the answer. The Workload ID Federation, currently in private preview and soon in GA, is a way for you to set up a service user leveraging the native CSP identities, and it can just log into Snowflake without any credential on our site. This is going to be a game changer in terms of ease of use and at the same time improve security, right? There's no need for managing credentials, Snowflake, rotating it, and any of that. These are centralized, as Eric mentioned, in the place that you already have your identity lifecycle management, where they're really good at it, quite honestly. And why not, using it for managing service users at Snowflake? That being said, you still inherit the familiar experience of our back Snowflake, so that's still there, but the credential is centralized on your IDP. So this is, I highly recommend looking into it. And this was our number one recommendation when it comes to service user migration. I also want to call out that we have a very active campaign with our partners and the application providers. So everything that we tell you here, we're actively working with them to add support, because that's the first question we get. It's good you support it, but guess what? I use apps to connect, right? Until the app gets there, I'm not going to support. So we have quite a number of these partners that are working with us to go to market with us, and more to come in the upcoming months. But the best way to get traction is reach out to your app provider. You guys are paying for it, so you have the right of, asking for the support. And so that's one thing we would ask you to do. Sometimes federation is not an answer, and so we wanted to kind of provide you with more ergonomic ways of accessing Snowflake, and programmatic access token is our answer there. It went to GA last month. It is an industry standard authentication mechanism to access the APIs. You can now use this to connect to Snowflake Cortex, Copilot, container services, and what have you. And despite it being a industry-wide accepted way of doing it, we did it with our flavor. We basically took the secure by design that Eric mentioned and added to all kind of PAT implementation. What that means is there are three things for us. Number one, out of the box, PAT requires a network policy to be in place. That's very important in terms of if there is a compromise in the PAT, it cannot be used outside your network perimeter. Number two, by default, PATs have a 15-day expiry. What that means is that it forces you to think about rotation, and if, again, it shortens the attack window in case you're compromised. And the third one is the PAT that we build is tied to a specific role, which means that it cannot impersonate every role that you have access to, only the ones that you authorize you to do so. And because of those three, we feel like it's more aligned with our secure by design theme. That being said, PAT has a secondary property for us, which is a drop-in password replacement for the legacy applications that are not ready. Despite our effort to move these apps. We know that things will take time, and so this will be the answer. You can, actually this is something Eric did, you can copy paste the path into the password field of any application, and we have the right logic on the server side to know that this is the path, not password, and accept it, right? So this works independent of any application that you use. And for those reasons, it's a better solution for key pair for us because it has a better ergonomic in terms of lifecycle management, and it has more secure by design built into it. And of course, it works everywhere. There are applications that doesn't support key pair, but every application supports path. Just a side note here that at the same time we build path, also aligned with the secure by design, we're adding automatic leak path protection.
LPP?
What that means is that we work with GitHub, and if your developers accidentally checked in a path into a public repo, we will automatically revoke that on the Snowflake side, so you can rest assured you're protected. Eric also mentioned that one of the pillars that we were focusing on was around least privilege principle and making sure that we give the right ergonomic way for customers to control what roles are allowed by the calling application and also when sharing. User-based access control is the first new identity controls that we're introducing. And what basically it allows you to do is to assign the privilege directly to a user. Very similar how you can share a Google Docs to an actual user. Now you can do the same thing, and also database and application roles. For example, you can now directly share an instance of SPCS to a user. And then the last but not least is the restricted colors right, which allows you to decide what subset of the colors right an application can inherit from and use it when running. Again, another great way to reduce oversharing or over-premising an application at runtime. All right, I spoke a lot, and I think I was trying to answer the question you asked me, Eric, in terms of how we operationalize this one and what are the products that we did. But do you think this makes sense?
Yeah, I'm really excited about everything we've built over the past year, everything that we're building now, and beyond into the coming months and quarters. So, if I try to summarize the story here, I think it's really one of modernization, of this expansion of Snowflake's capabilities into the kinds of features that everyone expects these days. So it's new MFA features with TOTP and WebAuthn and enriching our existing offerings around OAuth and SAML. It's modernized service user credentials with workload identity federation and programmatic access tokens. And again, also continuing to invest in our OAuth and other service user authentication options. And again, on the authorization side, it's offering new features like user-based access control and restricted callers rights that give administrators more control than ever over exactly what's happening inside of their account to really get as close to least privilege as possible. But Anush, okay, we spent a bunch of time talking about secure by design, how we think about this space. What about all the other pillars that we talked about?
Oh, wonderful question, absolutely. So, we had a very busy day today to exactly go through this. And if you've been following our talk track, some of these may sound repetitive, but to Eric's point, we also wanted to take a more proactive approach in helping secure customer accounts. So one of the things that we spent a lot of time this year was around monitoring. And Trust Center is, as you know, our centralized risk posture management solution from Snowflake. We just had a session before this. You can look at the recording, but there we talked about a lot of new innovations, how we're entering data security posture management. We're leveraging ML models to detect anomalous behavior in the account, and also ability to extend Trust Center through extensions. So now you can build your own scanner. So please have a look if you're interested. And then the last pillar, as Eric mentioned, was about making security easy to use, right? This persona that deals with security is not necessarily a SQL expert. So we want to be cognizant of that and make it such that the familiar experience that they're used to is repeated on the Snowflake side. We also wanted to make sure that the security experience is seamlessly integrated to their workflows so they don't have to create or use multiple tools, and of course it's consistent. As part of that, we now have support for Copilot for Horizon Catalog. That's a way for you to ask natural language questions from Trust Center, and that just becomes an extension. And then there's, again, that recording has a lot of those demos in it. We also have two things that we briefly talked about yesterday around making it easier to set up network policies. As you know, it's hard to know the sort of IP addresses that access your account. So we have two products that we think that is going to help with that. One is the network access transparency, which is basically two new account views in your account that can help you see access to your internal networks and also the internal stages. This is useful because you can use it to do security analytics and also use them to set up your network policy, because now you have the range of IPs right at the tip of your fingerprint. And then the second thing that we introduced at this part of this summit, coming in private preview soon, is support for built-in SaaS network rules.
So excited.
Yes, I agree. It's one of the things we had to solve for Pat, and so the timing of this cannot be better. But basically the problem statement was, if you use one of these SaaS apps, their IP ranges keep changing on a daily basis. And so if you want to add them to your network policy, you need to kind of keep monitoring those and keep updating your network rules. So we took the hard work on ourselves to make it easy for you, so now you can reference these apps by name in your network policy, and then under the cover, we take care of the updating those IP ranges. And the reason we're investing so much in network policy is because that's a core part of our strategy. As Eric mentioned, and as you can know, the PAD requires network policy. And so hopefully this should lower the bar on setting up network policy, and you can set it anywhere. And along the same line, since we're talking about networking, we also have malicious IP protection. As you saw, there's a bunch of ambient protection we're adding to all of our customers free of charge on by default, and this is one of them. So what that is basically we work with the vendors. They feed us these IP addresses that are with high probability of hosting malicious activity, and we automatically block that accessing Snowflake. So that's a great way for you to know. And if there's a user from those IP that access your account, you can look at the account usage view and get a log of such access. Again, free of charge, on by default, no step needed. We're doing a lot of stuff in that space. Anyways, we said enough. I think you guys are kind of getting bored, and this is a great time. No, you're not. You want more? Meet me outside. But we have some demos. Eric, maybe you can show us how this whole thing come together.
Yeah, thanks, Neil.
Of course, yeah, here we go.
So everybody loves a good demo, and I particularly love a pre-recorded demo because I don't trust the demo gods. Okay, this is going to be fun to do in real time, pressing play and pause as we go, but so it goes. Okay, so in this demo, I wanted to recap some of the things that we just saw in terms of product announcements and the way that we're thinking about services evolving through their security story. And so it's the story of a toy application running on AWS EC2 and its security evolution. So here, as a developer, I'm signing into my test account, and I'm using, oops, see, I knew this would happen. I'm using MFA to do so. And, you know, this is great because that's a passkey. It's as simple as a single click. And here we'll show the little toy application and its data. So it's an application designed to serve Snowflake's new tagline, where data does more. You can select from this table. You can see all our lovely new words. And here we have a legacy service user that's designed to connect into Snowflake to serve this tagline. And you can see that it's configured with a legacy password, some hard-coded string. So over here on the right, I will show you the tagline server in all of its Python glory. So it's very simple. It takes the password from the environment, connects to Snowflake with the password, and selects from the table. We can run it and put in our legacy password. You can see that I'm a bad typist. And hooray. The core of it all, Snowflake is where data does more. But as we know, this is rather unsatisfying. We need to take this service, migrate it off of hard-coded passwords. So as a first step, we'll use a programmatic access token as a drop-in replacement. So what we'll do first is we'll add a network policy for this user. In this demo, I set one up already. This is perhaps illustrating where we'll be eventually, as Anush talked about with the built-in SaaS rules. We'd love to capture all the major cloud providers and tools that you're working with. So we'll add the policy, and we'll go to the UI, and we will add a pat for this service user. We have a lovely new UI for doing this. We give this pat a name so we know what it's for. We select how long before it expires, and we give it a role to say when the pat connects to Snowflake, it should have the privileges associated with this one role. And we generate it, get back this long string, copy it, and now what we can do is where we had a password before, we can delete it, paste in the pat, and now run the service again. And it works. It's a straight drop-in replacement of a password that now has better security. It's a more complex string, it has a network policy, it has a role scope attached to it. It's strictly better. Yeah. But in some ways, this is somewhat unsatisfying, right? Because we still have a credential that we have to manage. It needs to be vaulted securely somewhere. It needs to be rotated. But this EC2 instance has native credentials available to it. It has an AWS IAM role attached to it. Wouldn't it be great if we could just use that instead? And indeed, we can. So if we go back to Snowflake, we'll get ready to configure our user, and we'll go in and we'll make the change on the service side. So here we are, editing the service, and it's as simple as taking away the password, swapping in the authenticator to be workload identity, and that's it. It's the only change you need. You just need to change the authenticator. Stop using a password, start using workload identity. And then on the Snowflake side, we're saying, hey, this user, I'm going to trust this AWS identity. I put in the AWS account number. I put in the AWS IAM role name that I should trust, and then that's it. The alter statement succeeds. Now I can go back to my service and I can run it again, but this time you'll notice no credentials. I just run the service, and it picks up from the instance metadata service what it needs. And so there it is. At the core of it all, Snowflake is where data does more. And this is a lovely little toy, but of course, we know it's harder to do these things in production. Your systems are vastly more complicated, and there are many more corner cases to accommodate. So at this point, I'd like to invite Greg up to the stage to talk about Roche's journey getting rid of passwords.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks very much for inviting me to get on the stage. So my name is Greg Koyeta. I'm a product manager for data lakes and warehousing at Roche. And to conclude this session, I'd like to share a story how we managed to phase out, by and large, password-based sign-ins. So, before I start, let's take a look at the numbers on the right-hand side. So this is our data platform at Roche, built on top of Snowflake. So you can see it's got a fairly significant footprint, right? So once upon a time, the story starts, right, about, this time last year, the vast majority of our sign-ins were password-based, right? So in fact, we had hundreds of thousands of single-factor passwords authentications daily. And it was by far the most common way to authenticate to Snowflake. On top of that, we had very few service users using OAuth. There was no standard policy to rotate credentials or RSA keys for keeper authentications. Our password policy was there, but it was quite simple compared to what it is now. MFA was not set by default, right? It wasn't set by Snowflake back then. So as you can see, our security model was okay-ish, wasn't great, wasn't bad, and probably was no different to hundreds of other Snowflake users, customers out there, right? But at the same time, we started experiencing rapid growth of our platform. And it was largely due to a number of legacy system migrations. On top of that, we started seeing increasing demand for support of sensitive data such as PII or PHI. And then we had this move towards zero trust. So we had to do something. We had to, and remember, this is a year ago, we had to do something. We had to increase the security of our platform. So we sat down and we put together a plan and we embarked on a new journey to kill those single sign-ins. Right. So we set off by analyzing the current state, right, and identifying those top offenders, which are the service users or generally like users that are using basic password authentications the most. Then we published or created instructions, detailed step-by-step instructions for every application and tool that connects to our Snowflake instance, how are you supposed to connect to Snowflake, whether you're supposed to be using OAuth or Keeper authentication. And then we validated those instructions, made sure that they work, we published them on our wiki, and then we distributed them to our users. Then for some client apps, OAuth is not supported yet, or Keeper is also not an option. So we allowed the use of passwords, local passwords, but by exception only for a limited period of time. And then we implemented regular reviews of network policies. So we made sure that our IP whitelisting stayed up to date. We also made sure that we enforced MFA. Back then it was only dual mobile. Now we've got a variety of other options, which is great. We enforced it to all users with elevated permissions. This is going to be changed. We're going to enforce it to all human users. We made sure that all human users authenticated using SAML, and then we enforced regular rotations of RSA keys and service account credentials. So where did we get to? I guess you can group our authentication approach into 3 buckets. Number 1, recommended approach, federated authentication, SAML or OAuth. I mean, we want our users to authenticate using Roche credentials, not Snowflake credentials. Now, if that doesn't work, we accept key pairs, right? But you have to rotate your keys at least every 180 days. Now, you still have a tail of service users that, for some reason, do not support Keeper or OAuth. For those, we enable or we allow to use passwords, but for a limited period of time. And those users will eventually have to move towards either OAuth or Keeper or PAT or workload identity federation. Now, this is our progress timeline. So this chart shows number of service users that were using Snowflake password and Keeper authentication. And as you can see, those numbers have been gradually decreasing over the past year. And our goal is to bring Snowflake passwords to 0 by the end of Q3. I know it's ambitious, but we like challenges. Now, if you want to remember like one thing from my 5-minute speech, I want you to remember this. So this is a screenshot of a dashboard we created in Snowside, which shows a daily number of logins to our largest Snowflake account. And you can see a year ago, the most common authentication method was password. And then Keeper and OAuth were sort of right at the bottom, far behind. And now what happened is we started introducing our changes around October-ish, the 2 lines started to cross. So you can see the blue line overtaking the yellow line, and that made us smile, big smile. So this actually is the evidence of our success. This is our success metrics. So nowadays, OAuth is the most common authentication method, followed by Keeper, and passwords are still right there, but they're right at the very bottom and not for long. Okay, a few lessons learned along the way that I would like to share with you. So first of all, Set transparent rules. You have to define very clearly what's allowed, what's not allowed. For example, tell the users, if you're connecting from dbt, you must use OAuth. If you're connecting from Tableau, you can hold on to passwords, but for a limited period of time. Make it clear. Then involve your L1. I mean, L1 is your frontline officers. You know, they need to know what's happening, what's going on. Then provide ample relevant documentation. In our case, we created well-structured wiki, and we shared it with our users, and we pointed our users to them, so we didn't have to have multiple one-to-one conversations. Communication is key, so make sure you regularly communicate progress, especially if you're about to disable service users. You have to communicate it well in advance, and you have to communicate it more than once. Persevere. This is my favorite one. You will get unhappy customers. You will get escalations. You will get tickets. But you have to push through it. Perseverance is going to pay off. And you're doing it for a good cause. And last, don't delay this transition. Like, you know, we've seen it before. You have, I mean, it's very tempting to hold off your changes until mid next year. But trust me, this is a big change. You will get reluctant users, so start now if you haven't already. Finally, this is a quote from Sridhar, and it's very reassuring to see that Snowflake's commitment to the security of our data is their highest priority. And actually, I witnessed it firsthand when working with Anush and his team, and we will continue our collaboration to further enhance Snowflake security. With that, thanks very much for having me. Back to you, Derek.
Thank you so much, Greg. I think it's a really inspiring story that we can take such a complex production environment and still make the transition to passwordless. And, you know, Anush had said this before, and I'll reiterate this, you know, Snowflake is moving all of our own internal accounts 6 months before we're asking customers to do this. So we're on the leading edge of understanding how to make this transition, how to talk to you all about how to make this transition, and sanding down all those rough edges that we might find, you know, in advance of all of this. And so that brings us to the end of our time together. I'm looking at the clock. We don't have time for me to take questions up here right now. But what I will do is I will be in the hallway outside after this, and I believe a bunch of my colleagues are also around. And so whatever questions and comments and feedback you have, I would love to hear it. And again, thank you so much.